Order, order. Thank you all for joining us today. Today's e-petition session has been scheduled to give members from across the House an opportunity to discuss arrangements for touring professionals and artists in the EU. Sessions like this would normally take place in Westminster Hall, but due to the suspension of sittings there, we've started holding these sessions as an alternative way to consider issues raised by petitions and present these to government. And I'm very pleased that holding today's session virtually means that members who are shielding or self-isolating and are therefore unable to take part in Westminster Hall debates are able to participate. And we've received many more requests from members wishing to speak than could be accommodated in the 90 minutes. And so even with a short speech limit for backbench contributions, and that shows the importance of this to members from across the House. But I'm pleased that opposition parties have fielded frontbench speakers and that we have the Minister to attend and respond to the points members raised, as we would in Westminster Hall. So I'm pleased to present this e-petition 563294, calling on the government to negotiate a cultural work permit that allows music professionals, bands, musicians, artists, TV and sports personalities to travel freely to tour in the EU, and calls on the government to introduce Carnet exception for touring equipment. And we can't discuss this petition and the importance of the issues raised without taking stock of the way the music industry's business model has been turned on its head over the last decade. Where artists once toured to boost their profiles and sell more records, the explosion of streaming services in the last 10 years has changed the landscape beyond recognition, to the extent that few records make money anymore, and all but the most prolific artists are unable to make a decent living out of purely streaming. So in the 2020s, live performances are where careers and monies are made, but also where the creative and cultural exchange that makes our music and art scene magic take place. COVID-19 has of course been utterly catastrophic for a business model reliant on large gatherings and the ability to travel. And some of the artists the committee spoke to in our evidence session last week told us how little financial support they've received over the course of lockdown. But plans to rebuild careers and businesses after the devastation of the pandemic will be made all the more challenging and impossible for some. Where musicians could once tour freely throughout the EU, now the rules will vary from state to state, and that has huge implications. There'll be new and complex forms, costs for moving people and equipment around Europe, and a reduction in the ability to work flexibly and easily with EU artists and organisations. Just looking at the mountain of bureaucracy our touring creators will have to deal with if they want to gig in Europe probably makes the argument for a broad UK-EU agreement better than any of us can. For example, in terms of short-term working arrangements, an artist could go to Germany and France for 90 days in a year without a permit. In the Czech Republic, no permit is needed for those whose performance doesn't exceed 7 consecutive days or 30 days in a 12-month period. In Poland, it's 30 days. In Spain and Portugal, it's nothing unless you get a work permit in advance. Navigating the rules for multiple country tours has become remarkably complex, adding costs that will eat into the financial viability of the tour and make touring some countries at short notice virtually impossible. The new requirements for carnets and CITEs, musical instrument certificates, will also add to the time taken to cross borders and the risk of being caught in delays, a major risk for artists who need to cross multiple borders to get to shows on time. And for many, this probably means adding additional days on either side of the tour to leave room for delays and bureaucracy, impacting the financial viability of the tour. For most people in the industry, the nature of working as a musician was already unpredictable and precarious, with low rates of pay, but people stick with it because it's their passion. They're often a team and they want to pursue their dreams. Working in the EU, whether that's touring, recording, teaching, or hopping on a plane at the last minute to fill in for someone, has been an absolute lifeline for them and an essential part of their earnings. And there just isn't enough work or profile in the UK alone for most artists to make a living from. And as Sir Elton John has said from experience over the weekend, it's absolutely vital for new artists to tour Europe, getting your own music across the crowds from a different culture to your own, who don't necessarily speak the same language as you, just makes you a better musician. He went on to say, touring Europe allows you to absorb different influences, understand different crowds, and meet new musicians. It helps you get inside your art. You not only play better, you write better songs as a result. I I know there's disagreement between the government and the EU over who offered what and who rejected whose proposals, but while it's important to have clarity on what was discussed during the negotiations, a political blame game is not going to solve the huge bureaucratic challenges facing UK musicians seeking work in the EU. Because this isn't about squabbles over Brexit, it's about the government's key role in championing a vital UK industry that enriches our cultural life and that of the rest of the world. Government just needs to create the right channels to allow the creativity of artists to thrive, and they will do the rest, just as they always have. So before I conclude, I have some specific questions on how the government intends to move forward and some more technical points that may seem obscure but are important to touring artists. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could respond. First, the EU-UK Joint Commission meets this week to discuss problems with the application of the Brexit agreement. Can the Minister provide assurances that reviewing the touring rules is on the agenda? Number two, bilateral agreements are very much a second best solution, but what work is ongoing to reach agreements with individual EU member states that don't currently offer cultural exemptions for work permits, such as Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Portugal? Post-Brexit cabotage restrictions mean that live event hauliers can cross into the EU and then make just 2 stops before having to return to the UK. Haulage trucks usually travel with the tour, making stops at each show. So this makes the standard touring model of moving musical instruments by truck from the UK to venues across multiple countries impossible. Is the government looking at negotiating exemption to the cabotage rules for cultural purposes? And finally, the ISM, ABO and others say that they've lobbied the government for months to clarify whether carnets are required for moving instruments and equipment between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and between the UK and the EU. So can the Minister today provide some much needed clarity on that? So over this enormously difficult and bleak period, we've all looked forward to the time when we can forget about social distancing and face masks and experience the unique buzz of a live music event again. Most of us can't wait for that opportunity and creativity to be unleashed when this awful pandemic is finally over, and we can go and see the bands and the artists and follow the music that we love in flesh again. But petitioners fear that the way the pandemic has overlapped with the end of the Brexit transition period is masking serious underlying problems created by the lack of an EU-wide agreement for touring artists. As more and more people come to understand what the current situation really means for the future of live music and touring, for our world-renowned creative industries here in the UK and our impact influence around the world, there will be an ever-growing clamour for the government to find a workable solution. And as the creative industries struggle to recover from the devastation of the pandemic, they can't afford to wait years or decades for this to get sorted out through painstaking negotiations with individual member states. They need the government to get to work on an EU-wide solution sooner rather than later. I know there is real cross-party support on the need to find a solution, and I hope we'll hear a reassuring and committed response from the Minister on the actions the government is taking to bring this about and secure the future of a sector that we all love and value so much. Thank you. I now call Giles Watling to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here to represent 142 people in the Clacton constituency who signed this petition. And of course, our world-leading performing arts industries, which were my focus in my professional life before entering this place. And as someone who worked in Europe in that life before politics, I know that there are significant opportunities for touring performers on the continent. We must ensure that our domestic talent can continue to access those. This is crucial for their development. And of course, it is a great deployment of UK soft power. But as I said in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport questions last week, our performers are now facing a double whammy. An industry devastated by COVID and the loss of an entire continent as a venue. Thankfully, we're already working to help the industry recover through the Culture Recovery Fund, which provides a significant amount of money and demonstrates that the government at least takes it seriously. However, alongside that investment, we must ensure visa and carnet-free travel for performers, their kit, and of course, their support teams. Unfortunately, our proposals to the EU on this matter were rejected, and these would have allowed UK professionals to tour more easily. Nevertheless, we must continue to raise this issue with our EU neighbours. Encouragingly, in his response to me last week, the Minister set out how the door always remains open should the EU wish to reconsider those mutually beneficial proposals. After all, this is a two-way street. We in the UK want to welcome EU performers here as well. Everything from the smallest provincial venue to the largest festival is affected. In the meantime, where visas apply, our agreement with the EU contains measures designed to make the necessary processes as smooth as possible, but they aren't good enough. So we must remain open to discussing this matter. We must be ready to act for our performing artists who so rely on the opportunities in Europe and vice versa. But for the moment, I want to focus on music. Touring European countries is deeply important for the UK music industry. The EU is a key overseas market for the 2.9 billion of UK music exports, and the UK is the biggest exporter of music to the EU member states. That success has been built upon the ability of artists to travel freely through the EU. Music is also a key national economic asset, employing 4 times more people than the steel and fisheries industries combined. However, the inability of performers to access Europe is putting those economic, social, and cultural contributions at risk. We are now seeing that across the arts. The same risks are emerging for theatre and dance groups. That is why, as chairman of the APPG for Theatre, I wrote to the government to raise concerns about provisions of the Brexit deal that impact on the performing arts. In doing so, we were joined by the APPGs for Classical Music, Music Education, Music, Dance and Opera, supported by our secretariats, UK Theatre, SALT, the Association of British Orchestras, the ISM, UK Music and One Dance UK. I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, for the list, but it is a parliamentary clarion call. So I would ask the Minister to look at the points raised in our letter, to bring about that refinement and to continue to seek discussion within the EU and with the EU on the need for visa-free travel for touring performance. We need to get together. The EU needs to see sense. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Harriet Harman. Oh, Harriet, sorry, you're muted. Sorry, I couldn't see you.
Sorry. All right. Thank you, Chair, and I agree with everything you said in your introduction to this session, and I agree strongly with everything the member for Clacton, who's just spoken, with what he said. I want to add as well by talking about the music sector, so important in so many ways, culturally and financially. It needs income from EU touring to sustain it. Without a deal on visa-free touring, the costs in time and money of dealing with 27 different regimes, getting certificates, paying for visas and carnets will undermine touring and cut a swathe through our music sector. This is not a COVID problem, though COVID has made things immeasurably worse, and it's not a Brexit teething problem either. It'll be enduring unless it's sorted out. Those musicians just starting out will be unable to do the tours they have to get their careers off the ground. Many at the pinnacle of their careers will feel that they have no option but to base themselves abroad, which will be a terrible loss to this country. And many of those who currently make a great contribution to music will find that it's no longer viable for them and they'll give up and change career. This is going to erode the critical mass of our music base. We're being told this loud and clear. Every individual musician and organisation says the same, so we have to listen. It's not as if this is going to cost the public purse. On the contrary, it'll cost more if the government has to subsidise orchestras to compensate for the loss of money they could be earning in EU touring. The objective is not to use this as a stick to beat the government or to beat the EU. The only aim is to ensure our musicians can tour the continent without hindrance. We don't want a row, we want a fix. We've got a deal for the UK fish. We need one for UK musicians. It's really not acceptable for the Secretary of State to tell musicians that it's somehow their job to sort this out with the EU. That's his job, not theirs. The responsibility is on his shoulders and the power to break this logjam is in his hands. So what is he doing? Being Secretary of State is a big role, but he took it on. No one forced him to do it, and the buck stops with him. The music sector is looking to him to save them from this. He can't opt out. Does the Secretary of State want his legacy to be failing our superb? Or does he want to remember the one who rolled up his sleeves, gripped this problem and sorted it? That's what he should do. And if he does, we'll back him all the way.
Thank you. Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much. Really, because Giles and Harriet have said all the important points, I'm going to switch to an anecdote. When I got married, my wife and I had a one-week honeymoon in Paris. And after our meal, we were walking in the Quartier Latin, and we heard the sound of the bagpipes. And I said to my wife, that sounds like my friend Johnny Monroe. We went round the corner, and it was Johnny Monroe. He was piping, he was busking. And if ever I saw an example of British soft power, okay, at the most basic level, this was it. The crowds loved him, and he filled his bonnet with a lot of money, which we then spent on beer. So soft power, exactly as Giles says, is hugely important. And let's face it, music is truly international. It speaks to us all, regardless of our language, regardless of our creed, regardless of the colour of our skin. It is for all of us. What concerns me is the worrying thought that a lot of people are thinking about coming out of the profession, whatever sort of music it is, and that is absolutely disastrous, because they are the role models for the people who are just going to start out, for the child who's good at the violin, good at the bagpipes, good at the guitar at school, and to give them the ambition to succeed. So we've got to be very, very careful with this. If we get this wrong, we could actually deplete our musical resource, what we can offer international audiences. And by the way, my friend Johnny Monroe made quite a few francs back in those, no, it wasn't actually, euros back in those times. No, it wasn't, I get muddled anyway. How much money do we earn internationally with our orchestra and our performers traveling abroad? It's a vast amount of money, and it's incredibly important. And can I just switch the argument around the other way? The reciprocal arrangements are colossally important. I mean, would the Edinburgh Festival be the Edinburgh Festival without the international performers who come and play? It generates an enormous amount of money for the city of Edinburgh and round about that area. But furthermore, there are spin-offs from it. So we've got to get that right. I conclude really with this to say that it means an enormous amount to me, music, and I think it means an enormous amount to people out there. And if we fail on this one, we will deplete ourselves as a country. We'll deplete, as I started, with our soft power, which, let's face it, in these days of change and in a difficult world, we need to exert more than ever before. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak today, not least because I know that many other colleagues wanted to do so but won't get the chance. And I'd like to congratulate Tim Brennan on doing such a great job with his petition. We've heard about the huge economic contribution of live music, but it isn't just about the money. I was reading earlier today a wonderful piece Bernard Sumner wrote after the Brexit vote in 2016 for the New European, talking about how being able to tour and work in Europe and just to absorb the atmosphere and sounds from Berlin to Ibiza had influenced both Joy Division and New Order. He said, when Joy Division first toured Europe in January 1980, we were 4 rejects from the Northwest, for whom driving a rain-lashed van full of gear onto a swaying cross-channel ferry felt like entering a portal into another world. It was thrilling and exciting, the dawn of a decade and a time when anything felt possible. And that's what the government is taking away from musicians and everyone else associated with putting a show on the road. It's an act of stupid, wanton sabotage by those who promised that Brexit would mean a brighter future. Elton John said this weekend, if Brexit prevents many new musicians from touring, the only artists who are going to have any meaningful kind of live career are big, august mainstream artists like me. And trust me, I don't want that any more than you do. And he's right, Elton John has people to deal with this for him. The acts that are going to be really badly hit by this aren't the big players, but those building an audience or still slogging away, playing to the faithful after many years, or those that Elton John describes as edgier, weirder, and more exploratory. In other words, the sort of bands that I like. So I fully support the calls being made today for the government to get back around the negotiating table and reach an agreement over visas and carnets and everything else. Live music has had such a terrible year, and if this isn't sorted out before this summer, it will just be rubbing salt into the wounds. Finally, with my shadow transport hat on, I want to touch briefly on the cabotage rules, which will limit UK concert trucks to making just 3 stops in the EU, sorry. It's a sector where the UK dominates, not just because of the popularity of UK artists, but with huge US artists flying into Heathrow and sorting out all the logistics of the European tours here, UK trucks transporting gear, costumes, sets, lightings, and the merchandise for country to country, sometimes for months at a time. Hauliers are calling for a cultural exemption from the return home rule and the 3-stop cabotage rule. for the EU to recognise the UK CPC qualification and for drivers to be treated as road crew when it comes to visas. And I've raised this with the Minister several times, and to be frank, got an absolutely appalling response from the Roads Minister last week. I hope the Culture Minister cares more about this than her counterpart in DFT. In fact, I know that she does. So I look forward to hearing what she has to say at the end of this debate. And I would urge her, please let's get this sorted before the summer.
Thank you. Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. As an MP whose entrance to this House was partially due to the slogan, Get Brexit Done, I am pleased to say we did. And now we have our new slogan, Global Britain. I am a huge supporter of this slogan. After all, I believe that one of the main reasons people voted for Brexit was that they wanted their country to stand on its own 2 feet and make this country a huge success as an independent sovereign state. Alas, since 2019, we have reasserted our independence, which I believe is wonderful. Yet we have also had to battle a terrible pandemic, which has subsequently caused a massive hole in our public finances. My only belief is the only way through this pandemic is to stand true to Global Britain values and start becoming a net exporter instead of a net importer. Therefore, I was greatly dismayed to hear of the trouble that people within our creative sector are experiencing in travelling abroad to carry out their work, not only due to COVID-19, but also due to the new travel restrictions across Europe. Initially, many may not appreciate the financial wealth and cultural wealth that our artists produce. Yet I hold the firm view that our artists are probably our greatest exporters and true bastions of global Britain. And with this in mind, I hope the Minister will take time to listen to Ian Smith and others who have worked in this industry for many years. Last Thursday, Ian, who gave evidence, suggested that his solution to the travel restrictions British artists are facing was for the EU and UK to provide 90 days in any part of the year to creatives to tour without needing a certificate of sponsorship. This would eliminate the requirement for a work permit, whilst also ensuring that creatives only stayed for as long as was necessary to perform their shows. I myself do not know if this is the solution, nor if this is a policy which the government is investigating. Therefore, I would be grateful if the Minister could confirm whether she believes her department sees any merits in introducing such a regime. In the limited time I have had in this session, I have touched upon the economic situation that has been caused by COVID-19. I have also made clear that only by promoting British exports will we get out of this recession as quickly as possible. Yet, as we have heard, many people's individual financial position within our creative industry is extremely concerning. Like everyone, they need to earn money to live, and this is where my most significant concern lies. Having heard evidence from Raki, Youssef, Emma, Stuart, Anna, and the petition creator, Tim Brennan, it is evident that if these talented people cannot earn money in their chosen field, then they may have to look elsewhere. If this happens, we all lose. Can you imagine a world where the UK no longer leads in this industry? No, neither can I. We have led the world for many years in this sector. How sad would it therefore be if the year we become Global Britain, we also become Cultureless Britain? Therefore, I hope the government can do all it can to rectify this situation as soon as possible and investigate ways our creatives are not faced with these travel restrictions. Thank you.
Alison Thuris.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the Petition Committee for allowing this session. It's an issue of huge concern to my constituents in Glasgow Central, and the petition has received 1,015 signatures from my constituents. And it's no surprise because we are a UNESCO City of Music here in Glasgow. In my constituency, we have the RSNO, the BBC, SSO and Scottish Ballet, as well as many smaller organisations and musicians, artists, performers who are based there and tour regularly. But I want to make specific mention of those skilled professionals who are essential to making shows happen, who don't always get the recognition they deserve. My constituent Sean Murphy is one such professional, and he works as a lighting designer and technician for a range of international musicians and artists. And he says, I cannot overstate how much of a difference this would make to myself and many other production designers, engineers and techs in Scotland who make far more money on tour than we ever did
working in local venues, as well as having an incredible opportunity to present our work on stages and festivals we could only dream of having here at home. In particular, he works with many underground up-and-coming artists for whom touring budgets are already very, very tight, and this is particularly critical for those larger tours. And he asks the committee, one factor to remember, this is not only a band that goes on tour, they take with them engineers, tour managers, crew, catering and so on. They also hire lighting and sound equipment and trucking here in Glasgow and drive it around the EU. If visa-free travel is not secured, then the likely outcome will be that the band will still tour, making less profit, but critically they will hire most of their crew and equipment from European suppliers, which will be devastating to those skilled professionals who live here in Scotland and take their work all around the world. A different constituent, Craig Corse, has raised with me the issue of reciprocity, as other members have mentioned. And this issue is absolutely key about artists going out into Europe, but also about the artists who come to Scotland and make our city, make Glasgow such a great city. Craig speaks of the enriching live experiences for our domestic audiences, which will be lost if we do not ensure that they are able to travel here as well. And Celtic Connections and the World Pipe Band Championships have in the past been hampered by the Home Office's hostile environment, and it breaks my heart that this will be extended to those European artists who wish to come and enrich our city as well. And Craig says that back and forth collaboration not only enriches our artists' musical awareness and cultural understanding, in turn raising their international profiles and touring prospects, but it is a measurable cultural benefit to our domestic audiences who are introduced to so many new influences, ideas and art forms. For somewhere as multicultural as Glasgow, it's very much a fabric of the city. And I could not put the potential loss of what we lose here in Glasgow and in bringing people in and our own artists going out into Europe than Craig has put that. And I very much support the petition and hope the government will act on this with great urgency.
Thank you. Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And it's a pleasure to support this debate, and I'm grateful for it taking place. And I particularly wanted support of my friend, the member for Clacton, as chair of the All Parliamentary Party Group for Opera. I was happy to be one of the signatories to his letter to the Secretary of State, and I hope to declare that as an interest, together with the fact that a number of members of my family are professional musicians. It's important in particular for the opera sector, and I want to concentrate on that, but we should bear in mind both the important financial contribution that the music sector as a whole makes, as well as that soft power contribution that's already been referred to, and over 460 odd constituents of mine have written to me about this, supporting this petition. But from the opera sector's point of view, the linkage with the European market is absolutely critical. Hundreds, perhaps thousands over the years of British singers, other musicians, directors, producers, administrators, conductors have made their careers both in the UK and in Europe as well. It's been the launch pad for many of them for great international careers, but also to enrich own domestic opera companies. It's been particularly important over the years for many young British singers to cut their teeth in the smaller German repertory houses, of which there are far more, I have to say, than there are in the United Kingdom. It gives them the chance quite early on in their careers to learn their stagecraft, to actually build up the professional connections that then take them going forward, actually learning in front of a live audience. And to do that, of course, they need to be available not just for the run of the particular production, but for rehearsal periods as well. And if they're taken on for a number of productions, perhaps in small parts, to start their careers in the course of a season, that will go beyond any 90-day period that's been talked of. So that's why we need an extension, why we need a touring visa. And also, of course, applies to access to the major European opera festivals. Again, they will be run over a period of weeks or perhaps months, and therefore a longer period is needed. And finally, we need action for them urgently, because planning for opera seasons, opera festivals happens not just weeks or months, but frequently years in advance. We've already had so many setbacks with the COVID restrictions, as they look to reopen, are looking to do for the season in 23-24 going forwards. They'll be signing up those artists now. And so we have to have certainty for them and for agents at the earliest possible stage that they will be able to undertake those commitments and then bring that skill, that expertise back to the UK, just as we want to see their European counterparts enriching our cultural life in the UK as well. That's why it really matters. I'm very delighted that we've had the chance to have this debate. I look forward to the Minister's response.
Thank you. Alex Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Madam Chair, and I am grateful to be able to speak in this debate today on an issue that I know truly cuts across the political divide. It is a big yet candid claim that music is a central component of what makes Welsh communities unique. Now, from singing the Welsh national anthem, Mein Hen Wlad fy N'adau, at the rugby, to memories of singing Calon Lan in school and beyond, music really is at the heart of Welsh culture and identity, and not least my own. Now, some of my earliest memories growing up around the Cynon Taf are days spent listening to one of the oldest and most well-known brass bands in the world that quite literally developed on my doorstep, the beloved Cory Band. Now, the group have a proud competitive history in their field, both on the national and international stage, and are in fact the world's #1 band and European brass band champions. Now, in ordinary times, the group would be travelling to Malmö in Sweden this summer to compete once again to fiercely defend their title. All of this was made possible in years gone by thanks to the freedom of movement that being a member of the European Union afforded us. Now, while I'm disappointed to see that coronavirus has led to the cancellation of this year's competition, I have urgent concerns about the viability of groups like the Cory Band and their ability to travel even post-COVID, post-Brexit across the world. Now, the current system in place for those required to travel includes unnecessary and extremely costly admin fees that make travelling to EU states for work purposes virtually impossible for those in their sector. We must also bear in mind that touring professionals and artists represent a group which has often slipped through the net of the government's financial support schemes that have been made available over the last 12 months or so. And the Fantastic Musicians Union, of which I declare that I am proudly a member of, have revealed some shocking findings about the future of this vibrant sector. They predict that 87% of musicians will be earning less than £20,000 this year, well below the UK average income of £29,600, and worryingly 65% of musicians are currently facing financial hardship too. I am incredibly grateful to represent Pontypridd, an area with a rich musical history of its own, and I am speaking up today in the knowledge that people in my area have been and continue to be specifically impacted by this issue. It would also seem foolish of me to speak in a debate about touring professionals without mentioning our very own Sir Tom Jones, who was born and bred in Treforest in my constituency. Now, without the ability to travel freely and easily across the EU, some of Tom's great classics, which we all know and love to sing, would never have reached the ears and hearts of people all over the world. This could have been, I'm sure we'll all agree, a musical tragedy of epic proportions. Now, while I'm grateful to the Minister for taking the time out of her busy schedule later this week to meet with both myself, representatives of the Cory Band and industry brass band associations alike, it is clear that the government needs to be bolder in its ambition and determination to solve this crisis in the creative sector before it is too late. I therefore urge the Ministers to feed back the concerns raised here today on behalf of the 280,000 plus people who have signed this important petition and take the necessary action to support those impacted. Diolch.
Thank you. David Warburton.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I must say, and as Chair of the Music APBG, this debate really is critical. And I must thank the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham, both for her words earlier and her EDM on exactly this subject, which I very much support. And I'd like to thank the Minister in advance. We all know that the Brexit negotiations were tough and both sides needed to protect national interests and commitments to the electorate. But sadly, we got ourselves into a bit of a sticky situation for an enormously successful industry. Now, we've heard it already, but I think it will do no harm to repeat that because an industry visa waiver hasn't been agreed, each EU country now treats the UK citizens as visa nationals when entering the EU for paid work. Some EU countries apply a performers exemption, but not all. So artists may need a visa and work permit depending on the rules in each of the EU 27. And obviously facing 27 different regulatory regimes, immigration rules and rules on work permits is going to make multi-country travelling massively more complicated and hugely more expensive. And EU promoters are going to be far less likely to book British artists, orchestras and so on until this is sorted out. Plus, we've got new customs controls, including carnets and CITES musical instrument certificates. Portable musical instruments are exempt from custom controls on entering the EU, but there's uncertainty on whether the UK has applied the same exemption. And I'd be grateful if the Minister can give any clarity that professional musicians will not need carnets for entering or leaving the UK. But anyway, this is only individuals with instruments. Trucks do require carnets and wet stamping on each side of the border. And the free trade agreement imposes cabotage limits on haulage no more than 2 journeys after entering the EU before a truck has to trundle all the way back to the UK, which obviously makes conventional touring pretty much impossible. Now, in the 3 minutes that we've each got, this is the tip of a growing iceberg, and it's great to see such cross-party support. But what I'm keen to hear from the Minister what urgent steps are being taken to negotiate an exemption from cabotage rules and, of course, a reciprocal visa waiver as exists between the EU and other third countries. The music industry must be mobile. It's crucial for its success. When most artists and performers haven't worked for a year, and many have fallen through gaps in support as well, the very last thing they need is more uncertainty about working after the pandemic. We've got to clear that up so our world-leading cultural industries can continue to flourish and continue to grow. Thank you, Ms. McKinnell.
Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair, and I also declare my membership of the Musicians' Union. Essentially, this is a debate about an incredibly successful and growing part of the UK's export earnings, and it's been shunted into the irrelevant sidings of post-Brexit UK immigration policy. In essence, this is not an immigration issue, but it appears that the Home Office is insisting on treating it as such. I say it appears to be the Home Office because we don't know for sure due to ministers' refusal to publish the details of the discussions it had with the EU, which has led to this damaging outcome for UK PLC. Now, on immigration, I've yet to receive a complaint from a single Cardiff West constituent that says, you've got to do something about all these Polish violinists coming over here, carrying their fiddles, playing in our orchestras and entertaining our people. It's nonsense. Yet the government cites its manifesto concerns about taking back control of our borders as the reason it can't find a deal with the EU. Let's be clear, this isn't about mega rock stars, with the resources to employ people to sort this out. It is about the small scale touring artists starting out on touring on a shoestring, as honourable members have said, but it's also about British businesses which provide the movable infrastructure and touring crew for the big shows across Europe. Why is the government not more exercised by the fact that 80% of the trucks used in the EU for touring are located in the UK with UK businesses? Buses and trucks, by the way, which are all left-hand drive for a reason, because most of the shows will be in Europe. I spoke to one business owner who told me that he recently did a recalculation for a sold-out tour that had to be cancelled last year because of COVID. The whole crew, PA lighting, busing, trucking, catering, etc., are from the UK. But under this new regime, the original plans would mean losing an absolute fortune. So to be profitable, 50% of the crew will have to come from Germany. The UK arm of the tour will have to be cancelled. The band's equipment will all be moved out of the UK for storage in Europe. The losers are UK workers, UK gig goers, and UK export earnings. And as one business owner told me, the other losers will be the next generation of sound engineers, lighting engineers, technicians, and so on, as well as our musicians and artists. If the government doesn't fix this, it will constitute a staggering act of self-harm. And for what? In order to tackle a non-existent immigration issue. Surely, as the Beatles said, we can work it out.
Thank you. Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for facilitating this debate. Glasgow North is also in a UN City of Music, like my honourable friend's constituency in Glasgow Central, and home to some of Scotland's finest creative talent: authors and poets, musicians and singers, actors and directors, painters and sculptors, dancers, storytellers, makers in every shape and form. And is home to thousands of equally talented folk behind the scenes who help connect our artists with their audiences. And all of them have been hit dreadfully hard by the pandemic, and all of them have been let down by this Tory UK government. The venues they rely upon were the first to close in lockdown, and they'll be the last to reopen. Far too many self-employed creatives have been excluded from the support packages available. And now, just as the vaccine brings some light at the end of the tunnel, they're being hit by the consequences of Brexit. Hundreds of people in Glasgow North have signed the petition that we're debating today. It's been the highest percentage of any constituency in Scotland. They know, as others have said, how important the ability to tour is for performing artists and their support crews. We've heard the statistics about the millions of pounds generated for the economy through overseas markets. But we shouldn't overlook the creative imperative and inspiration that comes from touring as well. Interacting with different audiences and cultures, the opportunity to try different things, to hone your talent, and all the benefit that brings. And the reciprocal element is hugely important too. Our creative talent and their teams want to travel to Europe, but global artists want to come here too, and our audiences want to see them. But we've known for a long time how difficult it can be for inbound artists to secure visas. And now the barriers that global artists have experienced will be felt by European arrivals too. The Tory government's ideological pursuit of the hardest possible Brexit is having all sorts of consequences. Many of us warned about them, but the government seems to be surprised. We're beyond indulging in a blame game. It's time for the government to get its own act together. It has to put aside its ideology and engage seriously with the industry and get back to the negotiating table with Europe. Throughout the last Parliament, the government was warned about this. It can't say it didn't realise how important the issue would be. And the hundreds in my constituency and thousands across Scotland who have signed this petition are increasingly coming to realise that the best way to secure visa-free travel across the EU is for Scotland to become an independent member of the European Union. And in a post-pandemic world, that will be more important than ever. We've just had an incredible online virtual Celtic Connections Festival. It drew audiences from all over the world. It was fantastic. And undoubtedly, these new ways of experiencing music and art will not go away. But ultimately, if our creative and performing artists are to get back on their feet, they need to get back on the road. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Damien Collins.
Thank you, Chair. The restrictions on UK musicians touring in the EU adds costs and delays and will make it more likely that artists will no longer consider it viable to do so. Music venues and festivals in the EU will also lose out with fewer UK artists touring. This is completely unnecessary and will have a negative impact on artists, venues and music lovers across the continent of Europe. I know that the government tried to get a general exemption for the music industry from these restrictions, and I would ask the European Commission to work with us to achieve that. I think the member for Cardiff West was right, that the Beatles were right, and they said that we can work it out. And I hope the Minister can do more than quote Oasis and say that we've just got to roll with it. We need not only a simplified visa scheme, but to make it easier for them to tour, but an exemption from their equipment having to go through the kinds of customs checks that we were required if you're exporting goods. Other members have spoken about the cabotage restrictions, but I think it's quite important, not just in limiting the movements to different countries, but also the restrictions you have to go through. A load of musical equipment leaving the UK has to get pre-clearance at the internal border at Ashford in Kent. It could then have clearance again when it arrives in Calais. If it's going to a member state like Italy, it gets clearance from the customs clearance point in Italy again before it can go on to its ultimate destination. This adds not only cost, but time as well. And time is money for touring artists. We want to build back better from COVID, but to do that, we need to back the major talent of the future. Currently in the music sector, it's the emerging artists who face the toughest time. All artists are suffering because it's not possible to perform live, but that impacts on new acts more when that's where the majority of their income comes from. Online music streaming services have grown in revenue during COVID, as have other online services, but the vast majority of that revenue that reaches artists at all goes to the major acts. UK festivals that give new acts their chance to perform alongside major artists are being cancelled as their organisers cannot afford to carry the full liability for putting on an event where they can't get COVID insurance, either at all or only at an extortionate cost. Music venues can appeal to support from the government's Cultural Recovery Fund, but many of the artists that would seek to perform in them have little or no financial support. The music industry has for years been a great British success story because of the talent of our performers. We have a responsibility to support them if we want the next generation to reach its potential and be able to make a living from their music. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, I want to start by congratulating Tim Brennan for generating this petition. There'll be some who will whine that this is just the well-paid megastars and rock bands complaining about Brexit. As we've heard, it most certainly isn't. The truth is, 5 weeks in, this is the latest sector to shout out and demand that the government recognise their needs and get a grip to save their businesses. You know, all too often, governments speak of the value of our creative industries, and we should understand how important this sector is. I mean, of course, it is our music and performing arts that are often cited as a primary driver of Britain's soft power, as many have said. In fact, our creative arts account for a staggering 11.7% of GDP in total, according to DCMS figures. And live performance is the engine room of the creative arts. And of course, our music industry is a huge part of this, but so is the expertise that UK companies provide for US bands looking to tour Europe. The UK has been the bridge point into Europe. And if this isn't resolved, those companies will relocate to Europe and we will have lost valuable exports. But I want to focus on the challenges faced by other performing artists touring Europe, such as the world-renowned dance company, Motion House, based in my constituency of Warwick and Leamington, that depend on easy, unfettered access to Europe. That is what was promised to them by ministers and the Prime Minister. But because the government hasn't agreed to a sector-specific deal, it has created a monstrous problem in terms of work permits, in terms of moving kit around, but also in terms of taxation. In the case of Motion House, 50% of their revenue is generated from European touring, the remainder here. They typically travel to 15 countries across the European Union every year, so it's desperate for them. In the last 15 years, they could put together a comprehensive tour, they could fill in last-minute dates, they could accept any booking, they could pop individuals in and out of a country. But it differs from the mainstream music industry in that a fair amount of that zigzagging around takes place. So one of the primary issues is the movement between countries and the work visas that a country may extend. All 26 countries have their own rules, so companies must arrange for each performer for each and every country. And this compares to zero administration previously. And if a performer takes a holiday in that country, then that will count against their visa days. For example, Spain has a 5 days limit. So Motion House will need to apply for a waiver, and the cost of visas equates to about 100 to 150 pounds per person. Take 15 people, that's a significant cost. And as one of their contacts remarked, why has the UK not negotiated for cultural passports? As I said, the second issue relates to movement of equipment and the matter of cabotage, and many others have commented on this, so I will not go into that in detail. But the truth is, if you use a smaller van, you're not restricted. But the final thing is about tax. The entertainment tax in Germany at 17.5%, that's a significant cost. Madam Chair, let me just conclude by saying this. The government needs to negotiate a cultural passport. It was an obvious consideration. Why not put that in place? That is the most obvious thing that the Secretary of State can do.
Thank you. Greg Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm grateful to the Petitions Committee for allocating this debate. As you know, Madam Chair, I chair the Science and Technology Committee of the Commons, and we welcomed the fact that UK scientists, as part of the Christmas Eve agreement, were able to continue to participate in EU schemes via the Horizon programme. And one of the reasons this was a good move is that we know that science does not recognise borders, but is positively better for international cooperation. And exactly the same is true for the arts. The experience of working together with the best, regardless of where they are, helps excellence everywhere. The current situation is urgent and would be even more visible were it not for the curtailment of performances that COVID has required. But the privations of suppressing a pandemic whose virulence is not of human making is different from these constraints and these restrictions, which are entirely man-made. And there is no excuse for artists and audiences being prevented from enjoying future artistic performances. Now, I do understand that the EU proposed not to allow technical staff to be subject to the same rules as performances. Now, that's a nonsense and disrespects the essential artistic and technical contribution of professionals to an artistic achievement. I understand also that the EU wouldn't contemplate tours, insisting just on ad hoc performances, a pointless restriction of something, European tours, that should be encouraged and that everyone should look forward to celebrating as we're able to. This is a time, and the arts is a field, in which the spirit of creativity and fellow feeling must be found here. That spirit is necessary, but it's not sufficient, because details count. As we've heard from discussions of cabotage, from carnets, from visa waivers, from work permits, from customs and insurance, the practical is important. And as Stephen Sondheim wrote of artistic labours, having just the vision's no solution. Everything depends on execution. Putting it together, that's what counts. And I hope the Minister will be prepared to roll up her sleeves and do just that.
Thank you. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to take part in this debate, to support the petition and to hear the so many other voices raised in defence of this vital industry. I should say I should declare an interest because I have a sister who works in the music and creative industry. She doesn't tour Europe, so she won't be directly affected by this. But like everyone else in the industry, there will be an impact for her if the government cannot find a way to reach an agreement with the EU. But then in truth, which of us doesn't benefit from the music industry, the creative industries in this country? Which of us hasn't turned to music to help us through lift our spirits in this past year? Free live streams, old gigs, theatres have all made their way from the stage into a lounge. But, you know, it's not just something that is there for our enjoyment, simply to enjoy. For people like the self-employed opera singer in my constituency who gets most of her income from Europe, or at least has done until now, or the many self-employed musicians, technicians, specialists who are now struggling as the way in many other businesses are with the red tape they have to navigate through Europe. We've heard so much about the cabotage and the visas. They're all affected, but together they make up an industry which is vital to this country's economic well-being. The music industry creates £5.8 billion worth of income. Creative industries, more than £100 billion worth of income a year. But there's also, as my honourable friend from Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross said, there's the flip side of that. It's not just the touring musicians going out into Europe and gaining the experience they do. It's the people who come here as well. And in my city of Edinburgh, it's almost incomprehensible to think what the impact might be if we cannot find a solution for this. The Edinburgh International Festival is an event which is rivaled in size only by the World Cup and the Olympics. It's the largest arts, music, entertainment festival of its kind in the world. You can measure its importance in terms of the money it brings in, the jobs it creates, but there's something more than that. Edinburgh International Festival and events like it up and down the country are part of the cultural fabric of this country. And that is what is at stake here. The cultural fabric, a vital industry, and the future of so many individual musicians, artists, craftsmen who depend on this music and creative industries and are now depending on our government and the EU to come up with a solution. Surely they can do that.
Thank you. Nikki Aitken.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm delighted that the Petitions Committee is hosting this virtual debate. And I'd like to thank my 1,112 constituents who signed the petition. As honourable members have outlined, as of the 1st of January, UK musicians can no longer travel and work freely across the EU. It is hugely disappointing that the EU Commission chose not to pursue what appears to have been a sensible solution suggested by the UK government at the beginning of the Brexit negotiations to allow freedom of movement for performers. British musicians, including our world-leading orchestras, bands and singers, bring so much, both in terms of their cultural and economic contribution, but they and their supporting managerial and technical staff must now abide by 27 different sets of rules and regulations, What might be required as a permit in Berlin may not in Paris. The new rules are painfully bureaucratic. Instruments transported by truck or cargo, for example, will, as we know, require carnets or passports for goods to be wet stamped by border control officials, whilst portable musical instruments for professionals do not. For touring musicians used to frictionless travel between several countries, these new restrictions are expensive red tape and threaten the entire industry. The London Symphony Orchestra, based in the Barbican Centre in the City of London in my constituency, was founded in 1904 and is the oldest of London symphony orchestras. But the present restrictions on live performances, combined with these future challenges to touring in the EU, threatens its very existence. What they need is a reciprocal agreement that allows the free passage of performers, equipment and crew. A reciprocal visa waiver already exists for performers and crews between the EU and other third countries, and the government should aim for equivalence to a secure visa-free travel for touring musicians. Under the new restrictions, UK trucks carrying touring musicians' equipment are restricted to one international movement, followed by only 2 further permitted stops before being required to return home. This limit is arbitrary and punishing. Without multiple stops, there simply cannot be a European tour, and the UK concert haulage industry would be devastated. I hope my honourable friend will discuss with her European counterparts about extending the current limit of stops on the continent for any registered vehicle. The UK is a global leader in this sector, and every step taken to allow both UK and EU musicians to tour freely throughout the UK must be done to support our economy recover, preserve the prosperous future and uphold our global influence in the music industry across the world. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to our SNP frontbench spokesperson, Pete Wishart. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Pete.
And thank you once again, Madam Chair. Can I refer to my entry in the Register of Members' Interest? This has been a fascinating debate, which I think just demonstrates the support and affection our musicians are held in right across the House. And I also want to pay my appreciation to Tim Brennan, who's assembled this petition with customary energy, commitment and passion. I had the great fortune of having some modest success as a touring artist, having spent 16 years in the music industry as a keyboard player with Runrig. I was lucky. Runrig had top 5 albums in Germany, Scandinavia and the UK. We filled arenas and we managed to play at all the top festivals. And much as I love my time as an MP chair, that was just simply the greatest of times, something that every young artist dreams and aspires to. From starting out in that cramped transit van, guitar case on your knee, 4-tour room in some cheap hotel in Hamburg, Copenhagen or Amsterdam, spending what's left of your very modest fee on a beer after show, the dream that you will come back all conquering. Breaking Europe, building a career, that's what it was all about. Europe's on our doorstep, but it can sometimes feel like another world, a continent with a diverse musical taste, loyal fans, and almost inexplicable and insatiable musical curiosity. It's just the experience of being there, the excitement of performing in an array of wonderful destinations, sharing a musical exchange with people desperate to know where the music comes from and what informs it. Music is a border-free proposition. Bands are multinational. Music doesn't care which country it's in. It's almost the exact opposite of Brexit. Leaving the EU and ending freedom of movement was therefore always going to be a disaster for our artists and musicians. Never properly considered in any of the discussions, our artists and music industry have ended up as nothing but mere collateral, nothing but chaff in the tragedy that is ending freedom of movement. Like the rest of us, musicians will only be allowed to spend 90 days out of 100 in the EU. At least I think that's what it is, because nobody's actually clarified the situation for us. Now, a European tour, it could involve playing in anything up to 15 countries. Each of these countries with its own developed live scene, and each of these countries with their own demands in terms of transport and organisations. Now, bands tour because the economy of that, the cost of assembling crews, transport and organisational infrastructure. Now, I remember at the height of our success, sometimes we would be on the road for about half the year, mainly in Europe. 90 days could be almost over before the set list is properly bedded in. And musicians will always also now have to face these Brexit border arrangements to negotiate, and this will increase red tape and costs. The fact that a band's carny has become a political issue is almost surreal and extraordinary. Carnies are supposed to be boring. Under the new arrangements they'll only allow two stops before a UK truck will have to return home. With that being the case, it has to be said that most European tours will probably just have to close. Then there's the new Brexit taxation and fiscal measures. There'll be new arrangements for national insurance and new arrangements for income tax, and there's VAT. I still don't know if it's going to be a requirement to register for VAT in all European countries. But whatever the outcome of all this, there'll be more accountancy costs, more hours spent on paperwork, more costs for artists. Artists just want to perform and create. They don't want to be overwhelmed with paperwork. Brexit was supposed to end bureaucracy and the bureaucrats. Drummers might end up as bureaucrats now. Can you think of the absurdity of that? And where touring is the prime generator of income for most artists, because, as we've heard, the pitiful return that artists now get for the recorded works with streaming and digital. There's one feature of touring that quite often can make the difference between profitability, break-even, or going under, and that's the merch. All the new EU rules could make that margin even more precarious. Profitability from merchandise could dramatically reduce, again, more barriers, more burdens, more costs. But it's a visa, it's a killer. All of this. And it's the one thing that could just make the whole enterprise simply not worth it. I think the first thing to note is that this government assured the music industry that it would secure an arrangement that would ensure visa-free travel. I remember quite clearly the former minister, or the honourable member for Selby and Ainsty, saying explicitly that visa rules for artists would not change. And I think this is why this all seems like a total betrayal of a sector. And where it's true, there's some countries like France, that have said they'll continue to allow visa-free travel for artists. Most have said they will not. Now, we don't know what the total costs are going to be, but let's generously assume that the cost of a visa, insurance, and other associated costs will come at around £300 per person. That's been very generous. Now, a modest travelling outfit of 5 band members, 3 crew, a sound engineer, a tour manager, and a driver will mean additional costs of £3,000. And that's just for one country. This could be doubled, trebled, increased tenfold, dependent on how many countries will be included on that tour. Medium-sized and larger enterprises with their array of lighting technicians, set designers, PA crews, caterers and accountants could face costs of £10,000 before a sound check has even been done. And for bands operating at extreme margins, the EU will be closed because of these costs. And it's been said before, and it's worth, I think, reiterating in the sum up. The music industry is the UK's cultural jewel in the crown, worth 5.6 or 7 billion to the economy. We are second only to the US in worldwide reach and impact. It's just something that we do spectacularly well. It provides this immense soft power for the UK. It's just and this is what makes the government's lackadaisical indifference to this even more bizarre. And I think we know that for this government, it's all about their obsession with ending freedom of movement. Nothing is more important than that mission. And if live music falls foul of that objective, this looks like live music is just going to have to suck it up. And for all of the ridiculous EU blaming, the minister said the other week that people must have what they voted for. And the offer the EU made to allow visa-free travel for those 90 days was rejected because, as she said, it might just open the door. Can I remind the minister, it's this government that took us out of the European Union and ended freedom of movement. It was their lack of negotiating guile that has left our artists abandoned. I struggle to think of one artist who wanted this awful Brexit, but it's our artists that are left in a situation, have to pick up these pieces of something they wanted no part of. So it's up to this government to fix this out. What the government didn't count on was his backlash. The almost 300,000 people who have now signed the petition, the letter by the cream of UK talent, our top musicians, and the strong feeling right across the industry. The government versus our musicians and top artists isn't a good place to be for any government, and all anybody wants is for this to be fixed. Being phoned up by Sir Elton John in an evening warning about the demise of the touring sector isn't good for a Secretary of State. The UK government must work with the industry and negotiate a cultural exemption or a cultural passport as been explained and defined with the EU to allow our musicians, our crews to travel and work freely across the EU. We don't want to hear anymore that it's all the EU's fault. We want to hear what the government is actively doing. This petition shows the public really cares about our artists, that their music industry is something that they support, want to get behind and ensure that we get this fixed out. The government has said the door's open. The EU have said that they're prepared to discuss and negotiate. It's now time for the government to listen, to respond, and for goodness sake, get this fixed out.
Thank you. We now go to the Labour frontbench spokesperson, Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to begin by thanking you and your committee for arranging this important debate. We've heard from a whole number of members on the impact that that the lack of an agreement required will have on their constituencies. I know also that there are a large number of MPs who would have wished to speak in this debate but weren't allocated time. And I feel sure, Chair, that if this issue is not resolved, it will be one that is returned to in the House of Commons again and again and again, and no doubt in the other place. It's simply not an issue that is going away. So it would be great if the Minister in her response can answer some questions, which I'll have for her later, about the next steps, because I know that the high levels of interest across all parties demonstrate that this is an issue that simply must be resolved. Particularly struck by the comments, the member for Clacton, the member for Camberwell, Caithness, Bristol, Pontypridd, Cardiff, Folkestone and Warwick, showing that this isn't an issue that is London-centric either. This is not something that is the preserve of those with interests in London's West End, though we did hear from London West End's representative, is not something that's constrained to the metropolis either. There is an interest in this right across the country, and I think I'll try and say why that is, as well as pressing the government on how we are going to resolve this, which it's clear that we must do. I would like to thank the 300 people in Wirral South constituency who signed the petition and who showed their support for performers. It's not just musicians, performers of all kinds who were affected by the lack of agreement. I'd like to thank them for showing their support. And Tim Brennan, who started the petition, I don't think even he might have thought that he would have had such an impact that he has had. So thank you to him for starting the petition, and to all those throughout the creative industries who've taken time to share their thoughts with members of Parliament in advance of this debate. I think we've heard many representations which has made the debate really meaningful. But Chair, this issue is truly personal for me, not because, unlike the previous speaker, I had a career in a successful career in performing myself, but because my granddad was a folk singer, and some of my earliest memories are of watching him on stage. Now, he wasn't wildly successful. He had one song that did pretty well, and he didn't earn a huge amount of money from music. But the truth is, he didn't earn a huge amount of money in the railway job that he did. And the reason why he started gigging was the same reason that loads of musicians start gigging today, which is that their income might be pretty low, but if they've got a talent, you know, that can bring in that extra bit of cash that means they don't just survive, but they really live. You know, that love for music, of course, it's about the enjoyment and all of the things that it brings to our society and our culture, as other members have said. But that extra bit of income means the world, and it certainly meant the world to my family when I was growing up. And I've heard from performers of all kinds over the past few weeks since Christmas Eve, who tell me that it's still the case that for many, many performers, it's playing live that keeps them going. And of course, they'll still be able to play live in the UK. But European touring, for all the reasons that we've heard from members, is an absolutely crucial part of what happens in the creative industries in the UK to make it so good. Bernard Sumner has been quoted in the debate, and he's right. We cannot let it be that touring is just for the wealthy or successful. And in Merseyside, journalists from the brilliant cultural paper Vido Lito reminded me that just about now, breakthrough artists from Merseyside should be going to Groningen in Holland for an industry showcase that could make or break their careers. You know, maybe this issue is being masked because of COVID at the moment, but in years to come, we will pay the price unless we resolve this. Several members have mentioned opera. You know, that is an industry at which we excel. It's years in the planning. It may require many, many, many trips for professionals and for all those involved right across the creative sector to bring the wonderful world of opera to life. And you know, it may seem to some as an added extra, but if we look at the amount of growth that we've seen in the creative industries over the past few years and the growth that we are going to need to secure our country's economic future, I think you cannot dismiss the creative industries. So right across these industries, we know that people are worried, and they're worried that being a British passport holder just became a disadvantage at the very time that we need advantages in the global marketplace. There's an impact internally in our economy too, as we know that many of the cities outside London have a leading edge in the world of culture and creativity. And it's that reputation for music. I mean, being from Merseyside, I hardly need to describe how important this is. That whilst other industries, you know, we may no longer be leading in, this is one where we are and where it can have a disproportionate impact in terms of rebalancing our economy. And, you know, frankly, Chair, the Secretary of State said himself that the current situation is, and I quote, absurd and self-defeating. So the government must accept, and they've heard from members of all parties today, that this situation has got to change. As the chair of the Business Select Committee said, there is no excuse. So I just have two fundamental questions for the Minister that I hope she can answer when she speaks. I ask again, in order to build trust and confidence in the process going forward, we need to know what really happened. You know, there's been a lot of chatter in newspapers about this. So in order to clear it up, will the Minister commit to the government placing all correspondence in the House of Commons library between the UK government and the European Commission, and also between all government departments? And also, will she explain what assessment has been made about the relative position of UK passport holders in creative industries now and the impact on our economy that that is going to have? Second question, we need to know what's happening now. We don't want to leave this as it is. So what meetings are arranged? What is the schedule of meetings going forward to discuss this? What proposals have been tabled? Will it deal with the cabotage issues as have been mentioned, particularly by the member for Bristol West? And which department is in charge of this issue? Can we just get that clear? Is it the Home Office? What role are the Department for Transport playing? What role are the Treasury playing? Who is leading on the fiscal and social security aspects that have been mentioned? And exactly what role is it that DCMS are playing? Are they bringing forward all the opinions of all the different departments about how to resolve this? Or are they leading in policy creation? Are they the people that those in the sector should be speaking to? Because I have to be honest with the Minister, it is really not clear. One of the reasons it's not clear, and this is where I'll finish, Chair, is that behind all of this debate is a suspicion. There is a suspicion that some quite hardline ideology is now more important to the Tory party in government than one of our most successful industries in the British economy. That does feel to me to be quite ironic, and I hope it's not true. So the Minister must prove us all wrong and show that one of our successful British exports And frankly, the thing that carries our reputation abroad beyond any diplomatic exercise, our culture, is much more important than simple ideology. She has a choice. Prove that our industry matters more than politics. Get this sorted, and we'll all be able to enjoy the output of our creative industries for many years to come.
Thank you. And I now call the Minister for Digital and Culture.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to start by thanking you and your committee for calling this debate on such an important issue. The government recognises the importance of the UK's cultural industries. We understand the huge role that they play in creating jobs, in generating investment and growth. The art and culture sector alone contributed almost £35 billion to the UK's domestic economy in 2019. And the support and the media attention generated by this e-petition just demonstrates how touring is not solely important to the cultural and creative economy and those who work in it, but it also highlights the UK's passion for these sectors, how vital they are for our entertainment and our enjoyment, but also our emotional and mental health and well-being, our sense of collective enjoyment and togetherness at a time when so many of us are separated from friends and family, and we all look forward desperately to their full return following the pandemic. And that's why I welcome this debate, and I have been really grateful for the views shared by members across the House, and I agree with very, very many of the comments that have been made today. Chair, we've heard a lot about the Brexit negotiations today, and I think I should start really by clarifying some of the points around the UK's negotiations with the EU on this issue. The starting point here was that the government fully understood and understands and recognises the importance of touring for UK musicians and other cultural professionals. And I've met with the team at BEIS who conducted this part of the negotiation, who fully understand that the cultural and creative sectors that in DCMS we represent rely on the ability to move people across borders quickly and simply and with minimal cost and administration. They are fully aware of the financial implications for this significant sector on this being hindered. And that's why, as so many honourable members will be aware, the UK pushed for ambitious arrangements for performers and artists to be able to work across Europe after the end of freedom of movement. Of course we did, because they are so vital to our economy. And our proposals were very straightforward. They involved capturing the work done by musicians, by artists, by entertainers, and their accompanying staff through the list of permitted activities for short-term business visitors. It was very straightforward. And this would have meant performers and artists could travel and work in the UK and EU more easily, and would mean that there were no requirements for work permits either. And it's really important to stress that the UK's offer wasn't one dreamt up by civil servants or politicians. It was very carefully developed in consultation with experts from the UK's creative sectors. We listened to experts in British music, those at the coalface, including bodies like the Musicians' Union, and we reflected their views honestly in our proposal to the EU. And that proposal offered a very straightforward solution for our creative industries, which would have benefited all sides. Quite simply, Chair, the EU rejected this proposal. There was no specific counter offer from the EU concerning touring for musicians or for the creative sectors. What there was in other areas of negotiation was that the EU tabled text regarding paid activities that can be conducted without a visa. And this suggested that that might include ad hoc performances. So these proposals would not have addressed the sector's concerns that we worked so hard to gather before the negotiations. Critically, these proposals put forward by the EU were non-binding. They did not include any of the touring or technical staff, who we know are absolutely vital. They did not address the massive issue of work permits, which are different in every member state of the EU, as we've already heard. And on top of all this, while not offering any special carve-out for performers, the EU's proposals were also part of this package of visa-free travel for not only current members of the EU, but any future EU member, and that was across a whole wide range of other sectors. It's just simply not consistent with the manifesto commitment to take back control of our borders, and it wasn't consistent with the idea of Brexit that the majority of people in this country voted for. This isn't a blame game. The outcome of the negotiations is deeply regrettable for all our sectors. It's not the deal that DCMS or the government wanted, and it's not the deal that the negotiators pushed for. But as I've said before, my door, our door remains 100% open. There is scope to return to this issue in the future if the EU should change its mind, and we would welcome it with open arms. It is important, I think, to stress that through negotiations with the EU, transparency and procedural facilitation measures were secured, and that will help ensure processes are as prompt and as smooth as possible. And the agreement also contains provisions that promote efficient customs arrangements, and we're working very hard to make it easier to apply for and to use the ATA carnets, for example. The other key thing that I really wanted to stress today is that performers from the UK are still very welcome to tour in the EU and vice versa. Each individual member state will have their own requirements for this, but some are very straightforward. In France, for example, creative artists can visit visa-free for 90 days. And as ever, the UK remains open for musicians to tour here. Musicians, entertainers, artists, and all their technical staff from non-visa national countries such as EU member states and the United States can all come to perform in the UK for up to 1 month without requiring a visa if they're paid by a UK source, and they can come for up to 3 months without requiring a visa if they're sponsored by a registered tour sponsor. Non-visa national artists can also receive payment for performing at a permit-free festival for up to 6 months visa-free. And the list of permit-free festivals is published under the immigration rules and includes a wide range of events from Glastonbury to Glyndebourne. And finally, EU musicians and support staff who are being paid in the UK may also qualify for entry under the Tier 5 creative worker route if they're sponsored by a UK entity licensed with the UK Visas and Immigration for this purpose. And that's for up to 12 months and with the relevant rules providing for accompanying dependents as well. So this means, Chair, that the UK's offer to touring professionals is more generous than very many of the EU member states. It is absolutely within the gift of each member state to improve their own arrangements if they want to encourage a more vibrant and more welcoming cultural environment in their country. And as a government, we will engage with bilateral partners to find ways to make life easier for those working in the creative industries in countries across the EU. But we can all play a part in this. There is an onus on all those who care about this issue. For everyone who signed the petition, these are not EU rules. These are rules decided in each member state country, from Rome to Paris to Bratislava, as to how they welcome artists from around the world to their shores, how they value culture. So many members have asked what we've been doing in my department, DCMS, and of course we are absolutely committed to supporting individuals and businesses to understand and to navigate the actions they will now need to take, and we are taking all the steps we can to make new processes as straightforward as possible for UK artists performing across the continent. We've published guidance on gov.uk, signposting to official information provided by EU countries about their business travel routes, and that's going to be regularly updated. We're also undertaking a very extensive programme of engagement with the sector to help them understand new requirements, and working with Arts Council of England and other sector bodies to help distill this information and simplify the new rules. And of course, working hand in hand with the sector is absolutely vital to our efforts. So on the 20th of January, the Secretary of State at DCMS and myself held a roundtable discussion with a number of cultural stakeholders to hear from them directly about the issues facing the sector. As a result of this meeting, we have established a DCMS-led working group. This group The Cultural and Creative Touring Group met for the first time last Friday. It consists of representatives from other key government departments, as well as representatives of organisations covering the breadth of our cultural and creative sectors. This is about action and not words. It is about working collaboratively and urgently to address the range of issues raised with a view to improving processes and reducing burdens to help the sector work and tour confidently in the EU. Some of the priorities we'll be looking at include how we can get guidance to the sector to cut through the confusion and the bureaucracy. We'll be working with other government departments to make progress on some of our issues, like, for example, the Department of Transport on the issue of cabotage, which is worrying me for all the reasons that have been set out by the member for Bristol East, among many, many others today. We'll be moving forward bilateral engagement with other nations to get things done as smoothly and swiftly as possible. And we'll be looking at what practical support we can put in place. So the first meeting, as I say, was last Friday. It proved very constructive. I'm very much looking forward to the next meeting, which is next week, and to working collaboratively with departments across government and with the sector to deliver our shared ambition. And as Elton John, who's been mentioned a lot today, said last week, it's not just about the government doing everything. The music industry and other performing sectors can all play their part. These are incredibly influential groups, and we look forward to pushing this forward together. And with that spirit in mind, I'm really pleased the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is having ongoing negotiations with his EU counterpart starting this week. I think it's also really important to stress the government's also so aware of the significant impacts the COVID-19 pandemic is having on these sectors. We're really committed to continue to work with the creative and cultural sectors to understand the difficulties that they face and to help them access support through these incredibly challenging times and through to recovery. The £1.57 billion Culture Recovery Fund has already benefited a huge range of cultural organisations, including venues, festivals and theatres. And £1 billion has already been committed, and it's supported well over 3,000 organisations and supported more than 75,000 jobs, with many, many more freelancers and jobs in vital supply chain industries also benefiting. This, Chair, is the biggest one-off investment in our cultural and creative industries ever. It is a sum that far exceeds what's been provided in other countries, and it builds on billions more coming from furlough, the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme and other government support. £400 million from the fund was held back as a contingency to support cultural organisations and is now the basis of the second round of grant and repayable finance funding. And the second round will support those organisations who face financial distress as a result of closure and help them transition back to fuller opening, hopefully during 2021. So I hope that gives you an indication of some of the things we've been doing. I'm so pleased to have given this opportunity to discuss these issues regarding UK musicians and artists and cultural professionals who are seeking to tour the UK. I hope you can understand how passionately I care about making this work for them. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement does deliver on the government's promise to take the UK out of the EU customs territory and single market and to retain and regain control of our borders. But the government is absolutely committed to supporting the cultural and creative sectors in navigating these changes. And I'm looking forward to continuing our work with sector stakeholders to build our understanding of the impacts, to provide clarity and wherever possible to remove blockages. Our cultural industries have always been of such vital importance to this country, and with our support, they will remain so.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you to all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions. And thanks also to the broadcasters and Hansard and all of the staff who facilitated today's session. And I want to pay particular tribute, lastly, to the petitioner's creator, Tim Brennan, as well as Stuart Murdoch, Anna Patalong, Emma Pollock, Rakbi Singh, Ian Smith, Nikki Spencer and Youssef for all their useful comments in the evidence session that we had on Thursday. And on their and the petitioner's behalf, I want to say that I think they will still be concerned by the Minister's response. And as this issue isn't going away, I wanted to leave the Minister with just a few of the sobering comments that we received from artists on what the new rules will mean for their careers. One told us The new rules will be devastating for new musicians who don't have the backing of major labels. This will destroy British DIY music, arguably one of Britain's greatest exports. And another said, often I play in 3 or 4 different EU countries in a week. This is going to be a logistical nightmare. Also, often I'm asked to replace an artist who is ill and has had to cancel at the last minute. Now, if I need a visa, this won't be possible. Another simply said, new rules will mean we as a band will never be able to afford to play in Europe again. We are the country that gave the world the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Britpop, Elton John, Queen, and other cultural exports that are revered around the world. And it would be an absolute tragedy if we were to lose that status as a cultural hub. So we need to see real leadership and foresight from the government to ensure that we don't. And we need to see the government urgently get back to the table and sort this out. Thank you. Order, order.